Hello and welcome to today's TOC podcast. I'm Joe Weichert, co-chair of O'Reilly's Tools of Change conference. I'd like to remind you that you can keep up on all the upcoming TOC events, including webcasts and podcasts, by visiting the conference website, toccon.com. TOC Frankfurt is the next in-person event on the schedule, and now it's about 3 weeks away. So this year features not only the full-day TOC event on Tuesday, October 11th, but also a half-day social media workshop on Thursday the 13th. For more information or to register, visit tocfrankfurt.com. For today's podcast, I'm joined by Patrick Brown, Community Manager of the largest and my favorite social network for books, Goodreads. Patrick, welcome to this TOC podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So, Patrick, I feel like discoverability is one of the biggest problems that faces our industry, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets any better. I personally have that problem when I try to find something I'm interested in, and you recently announced at Goodreads a new book recommendation engine. So how much of an impact do you feel this can have on the discoverability problem?
I think this is going to be huge. I mean, I agree. I think discoverability is one of the main obstacles facing the book industry. And it's really from two sides. I mean, I think it's discoverability from the publishing industry or author side. How do I make sure that people can find my book? And then from the reader side, I think it's really a problem of choice, that there's so much out there that narrowing it down to say, okay, this is what I want to read now, that's really a challenge. And I think that the recommendation algorithm we have is really going to be a huge boon for discoverability. I mean, I think what we're able to do is we're able to hone in on your interests and then to take, the massive set of data that we have and use that to provide you with, sort of not only the right rec, but maybe an unexpected one. And, I think that in addition to all the other ways that people have been discovering books on Goodreads, seeing your friends adding them, getting a recommendation directly from the Goodreads community, that all of those things together are really providing a sort of, I think, the best solution out there right now to the discoverability problem.
Yeah, and you touched on Serendipity a moment ago. I want to go back and revisit that in a second. But I was just thinking, Netflix ran their contest to improve the recommendation engine that they have, and they made it really clear that that's a really hard thing to do, and that the logic that goes into it is really, really complicated. So how complex is the logic in yours, and is that a barrier to entry for competitors or anyone else thinking of creating a similar one?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I think you hit the nail on that. I mean, Netflix obviously really valued their discovery algorithm. They ran that whole contest. They were willing to give away quite a lot of money to anyone who could improve, their system. And I think that the big barriers to entry or to competition with us, I think, is one, we have a very complicated algorithm, a very complex system that's really been in, sort of in progress or underway for about 6 years. The company we purchased, Discovery, they've been working on this for quite a long time. They really, I think, have the best math out there, really the best thoughts coming from that Netflix contest, actually. A lot of that went into, the work that they did on that. And then, the other thing that's a big barrier to entry is that we have 200 million books added by 6 million members on our site. And that's really what's powering these recommendations, is that we know a lot about these books based on, not what publishers want us to know about them, not necessarily metadata that's coming from the books, but what readers actually think about them, how they relate to one another, how they've been shelved by users, how they've been rated by users. So I think that that's the really big barrier to entry. One, you've got to get the math right, but then you've also got to get a big enough community together that you can, have the data to power that engine. So I think we've got both of those, and it's a big asset for us.
And I'm guessing that the algorithm will evolve over time based on what you learned from this initial implementation and other feedback. So do you expect to make a lot of enhancements to it going forward?
Definitely. I mean, I think it's already very, very refined. Like, I don't think it's a crude tool at all at the moment, but I think that there are definitely a lot of enhancements coming. We've got a big metadata gathering project underway. And we've already used a little bit of that to go into sort of how we make guesses about genre and things like that. But we're in the process of gathering a lot of that data. That data will eventually come into play. And yeah, just as we go, we're going to see, okay, what recommendations are converting? Like, what are people adding to their to-read shelves? How can we use that data to learn to make sure that our algorithms, recommending more books like that and less books like the one that people are marking not interested. So yeah, as the more people use it, the more data we gather on those books, the better it's going to get, for sure.
And just coming from O'Reilly, where we try to share as much as we can with what we learn about the industry, will you guys be in a position to kind of share any of your learnings without obviously giving away kind of the secret sauce and the 13 herbs and spices? Just kind of curious to know if you'll be able to kind of tell people like me who use Goodreads, okay, you can influence it more in this area by doing that, or less by doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously we're not going to tell people exactly what the algorithm is that we're using. And to be honest, most people I don't think would be able to take that information and process it anyway. But I think that what we'll be able to do is say, these are best practices to get great book recommendations. And that might, we can already do that in a way. Like, I think, if you're looking for recommendations on a really specific subject, it makes a lot of sense to go and make a shelf of the books that you've read already on that subject that you really like. That's something that a lot of people now are like, oh, I should create a custom shelf because it's going to give me these better recommendations. So it's an interesting incentive to get people to sort of, use our site in a deeper way than they were before, maybe. And I think that as we go, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to learn a lot about how people think about books and how people sort of, as a reader, I think you have a way that you decide what you're going to read, and you have a way that you sort of curate your own reading list. And I'm hoping that what this recommendation engine is going to do is give us a sort of really deep view of what that is. And I would love to share at least some of that with, with the publishing industry and with other readers. I think people will find that kind of thing fascinating.
Yeah, totally agree. And so let's go back to this whole serendipity point again, because I think recommendation engines are terrific, and I'm sure I've taken advantage of more than I can even really think of. But one of the concerns I have there is, how do I avoid, or how do you avoid in this case, providing a service that just kind of builds on the echo chamber and keeps us focusing only on the things that we've done in the past, as opposed to discovering new things that maybe we didn't even know that we would want?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right to have that concern. I think I've seen that in other recommendation algorithms in the past, that it kind of generates a sort of best of list or most popular. Ours is actually pulling a lot from the long tail. The thing that, as I've sort of gone in and played with the system and built shelves and found recommendations, the thing that blows me away is how many books. I mean, I'm a book guy. Like, I come from a background in the independent book world. I feel like I've read some fairly esoteric stuff. The fact that it can still find books that have been around, that seem like really good books, they're very highly rated, lots of positive reviews on Goodreads that I've never heard of, that look interesting to me, I think that's an amazing thing. So to me, it's not quite replicating a browsing experience, but it is, to me, finding these weird hidden gems, which I think is kind of like, that's the real trick. That's what people want. They don't need another algorithm to recommend The Hunger Games if they've liked other, dystopian YA sci-fi. Like, everyone knows, like, those kind of books, I think. So we actually make pretty concerted efforts to exclude the absolute most popular books, because they actually tend to skew the algorithm a little bit. If you start saying, well, it's like The Hunger Games, well, lots of things are like The Hunger Games because it's been shelved so much. So we're actually kind of trying to dig a little bit deeper than that on every level. So I'm hoping that that's kind of like, that's the serendipity. And then I think the other way that you can get that experience is, like, when I find that book that I've never heard of, that ends up being an interesting book, and I read it and I'm like, oh, wow, well, I'm going to write a review of that, and my friends are going to see that, and it's going to sort of spill out from there. So I'm hoping that it becomes this kind of viral, that it's serendipity taken in a viral direction, which can be really fun.
Yeah, and I'm sure, obviously, your hands are full in making this as powerful a recommendation engine for books as you can. But now I'm thinking beyond books, and I wonder if that's on your radar too. So, in other words, I read a lot of sports books, and I'm a big fan of the Yankees, and I think it's great that...
I'm a Sox fan.
Well, this has been a great week or two for me, and not so much for you, huh?
Yes.
Well, sorry for bringing that up. Anyhow,
it's okay. It's all right.
I've noticed already that Goodreads has served up a couple of Yankees books that I hadn't even really heard of before. So that's what I love about it. But then I'm thinking, how could you go beyond books? So, for example, how could my long-form book reading habits influence a feed and recommendations through your recommendation engine for blogs and articles and other sorts of content on the web? Is that maybe on the long-term horizon?
I think for now we're definitely keeping our focus on books. I mean, we really want to be, and we think we are, the best place to discover new books on the internet, maybe in the world. And we want to, we really want to solidify our position in that. I think it's an interesting idea that you could take it and expand it out to like a sort of general topic and say, okay, here's great articles about, the Yankees or baseball or whatever, whatever subject it is that's interesting to you. I think at the moment we don't have data on that, so we're going to continue to focus on what our strength is and what we know the most about, and that's books and readers, and at least for the time being, that's where we're staying. So.
And that makes sense. I guess the other reason why I brought it up is because I feel like the line is blurring already and is going to become even more blurred between long form and short form. And Kindle singles are probably a great example of that, right? So where do you stop then, and how can you go even further in recommending more short form content?
I almost feel like that's not in our hands, that's sort of in the hands of publishers in a kind of broad sense, whether they be, traditional book publishers or people who are publishing right now magazines, journals. That those people, I think, are really starting to push the envelope and say, okay, this, for instance, like a lot of people in the industry, I read Keith Gessin's Vanity Fair piece about the publication of The Art of Fielding, speaking of baseball books. And I didn't read it in Vanity Fair. I actually bought it as a Kindle single from Vanity Fair's website. So I spent, I think, $1.99 just to get this one article. But it was an article that had been expanded out to about 80 pages. So it was definitely in that gray area, but I added it to Goodreads. I'm going to write a review of it. So yeah, I think that in that sense, yeah, we're going to start to see more. It really depends on where, we want to get the metadata for those kind of things. I think if it can be read on its own and sort of stand alone as a piece, then yeah, I think there's a market for that within Goodreads. And I think there's an interest on the part of our members to be able to say, okay, I loved Keith Gessin's article. I want to write a review of it. I want to recommend it to a friend. So I need that object to be able to do something with on Goodreads. So as we get more information about pieces like that, they'll definitely, I think, if it can be considered a book object on Goodreads, it'll come up eventually in the recommendations.
Yeah, so singles right now, Kindle singles, you can post on Goodreads and get even recommendations, I assume, then.
Or anything that you're, anything that's published as a standalone ebook that has an ISBN or an ASIN. It's really more of a metadata problem, I think, than it is mainly just because we don't have the object for everything else. We don't know what you think of, the article you read on Grantland or wherever it is that you found it, So, I think we're going to stick to things that are, on the longer end of that spectrum. It tends to be longer pieces that are published as Kindle singles, longer than a sort of 2 or 3 page essay. But yeah, I think you're right. There's definitely a blurring. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about publishing right now is this sort of obliterating of the rules of, okay, a book has to be X amount of pages long and, has to contain this and that. And I think that's one of the fun things. So I'm hoping that we get to kind of dig more into that.
Yeah, and I'm going to make one last point about this, and I promise I'll abandon the topic. But one thing just came to mind, only because I interviewed Mark Johnson, the CEO of Zeit, a couple weeks ago. And I don't know if you're familiar with Zeit's iPad app, but it has kind of its own recommendation engine built in, but for short form content and everything that I'm just describing out on the web, right? It's based on your Facebook, who you follow on Facebook, who you follow on Twitter, and so forth, and then depending upon what kind of things you read, it learns from that and recommends even more of it. And I'm just wondering if there's some way for you guys to work together, maybe to bring the services, join them somehow and offer something. So anyhow, just something to think about.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah, I have not heard of that app, so I'll have to look into it.
Yeah, it's my favorite iPad app. I highly recommend it. So shifting gears for then another minute here, thinking about genres, right? So besides sports books, I also tend to read a lot of World War II books. And I noticed when I went in the first time in Goodreads, because I've reviewed a lot of World War II books over the years, that there's a history section for me as a genre or a category. And there's some World War II stuff in there, but there's a lot of other history titles as well. And I'm just wondering, at some point, will I be able to make it more granular so that I can just hone in on World War II only as opposed to just history as a broad category in your recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of like granular sort of control over what you're able to, you're really going to be able to hone down and say, okay, this is the sort of specific kind of book that I want. In fact, I think eventually you're going to be able to say, okay, I want books about World War II that involve espionage. I want military history about World War II, or I want fiction about World War II. You're going to be able to really be more specific even than just World War II. You can already do a little bit of that by making a custom shelf, and we'll give you recommendations based on that, based on the books on that shelf. So if you've got, if you go, like, let's say that you want books about the history of espionage during World War II. So you shelve books like Operation Mincemeat and a bunch of other, sort of espionage history books. And you shelve those books together and you rate them as you thought they were, whether one's 4 stars, 5 stars, etc. We should be delivering more books that are, it should find books that are quite similar to those. It does not do at the moment subject searching. So it doesn't look and say this book is about World War II. What it does is it looks at how other people have shelved it and makes a guess and says this book is probably about World War II. So it's going to have some false positives and it's going to have some weird books in there. But it should produce some pretty good results. And as I was talking about before with the metadata project that we're doing, that should really produce more specific subject search, subject recommendation, and even things like, as good as we can get, things like tone, pacing, what kind, if it's a fictional book, what kind of characters are in it? Is it predominantly following a single character? Are there lots of characters? Is it told in the past tense, the present tense? All those kind of things. I mean, I think it's, Netflix kind of does that already where they say, because you liked The French Connection and Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, we think you're going to like Serpico, because it's another crime thriller from the 1970s in New York City or something like that. So they have a way of kind of saying, okay, it looks like you like these kind of things. We're gonna show you more of those. So we're definitely working on that. We're gonna have things like predictive ratings. So it'll say we think you're gonna rate this book 4 stars. All that stuff is definitely in the works and hopefully coming soon.
Okay, cool. It just dawned on me, though. Of course, I was critical a moment ago about serendipity and discovering new things, and here I am just encouraging you to let me drill down even deeper into the things that I like. So, I mean, I should probably take a dose of my own medicine here and realize that some of those history books that you're serving up might be things that I hadn't considered, but I'd be just as interested in as a World War II title, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the algorithm is really doing. Is it's kind of, I think that it's broadening my horizons in a weird way. But I have a shelf that's campus literature, right? And I for whatever reason, I like to read books that take place like at a college or university. And I was sort of frustrated at first because I was like, these are not other books that take place at a college or a university in some cases. Some cases they were, but, I was like, it didn't produce a list of the rest of the books by David Lodge, for instance. And then I started to think about it, and I was like, well, maybe there's something about these books that I'm going to like anyway, because it does seem like I've liked these other books, and these books are similar. So I've started to check some of them out, and it actually has proven out that it's pretty cool. Like, for whatever reason, the tone is the same, maybe. There's something about these books that's similar, and we, at the moment, I don't know if we're able to quantify what that is, but it's kind of fascinating. So, yeah, I think that's the serendipity, really, is that it's like, you think to yourself, okay, I want books on this subject, but perhaps somehow unconsciously you're actually suggesting that you want books that are like this book, but not specifically about the same subject. So hopefully we're able to dig some of that up and serve it up.
Right.
But yeah, I think that it's also, the great thing about Goodreads is that we haven't abandoned what we've been great at for the last 4 years, which is, having a great community of readers. You can go to the community and ask directly and say, okay, I want to read something cool next, and I don't want it to be, you could say, okay, I've never read anything about World War I, for instance, or, whatever, and they'll come up with all kinds of great books, and some of them won't be anything you're interested in, but if you're calling from your list of friends, it's likely that they know you and they know the kind of books you like, and they're going to provide you with an interesting recommendation that way, too. So we're hopefully hitting it from all angles. We've got the sort of machined algorithmic recommendations, and then we have a great community that provides recommendations as well.
Okay. Well, last area I wanted to ask you about, I think about this as both a publisher and a consumer, and I think the service that Goodreads offers is tremendous for consumers, and there's probably a lot of features there that I haven't even experimented with, and I may have missed this, but I'm wondering, is there or could there be down the road an opportunity to create kind of a widget or a plugin that publishers could use on their own websites? So like on the O'Reilly catalog, so that if somebody comes in and they log in with their Goodreads credentials, we know who they are, or actually I should say you know who they are, and you're kind of mapping their interest against our catalog and serving up recommendations for just O'Reilly titles. Is that a future option, or does it exist today?
Well, it sort of half exists. So you can certainly implement what we call Goodreads Connect, which is very similar to Facebook Connect. So if you have a website, like let's say the O'Reilly website, You can enable people, allow them to log in with their Goodreads ID, and what that's going to do is support their entire social experience from Goodreads onto O'Reilly. So they're going to see, in each book they look at, have any of their friends added that book? Have any of their friends reviewed it? What lists does it appear on? Things like that. What is not there yet is that the sort of data mining recommendation that'll then drive them to a specific O'Reilly book. That's not present yet. I could see how that would be really valuable, though. I mean, I think, all the Goodreads Connect stuff can be done through our API. So I think it's a question of when we decide to make something like that available. And really, do we know enough about your books, for instance? I mean, that's really sort of, that's the other thing, is that we've got to, if it's a brand new book, we don't know quite as much about that. And it'll take a little bit of time before that'll start showing up a lot in algorithms. So front list titles, again, I think that's what's kind of interesting about the algorithm, is that it's really recommending backlist and stuff in the long tail. So again, those front list titles, that's something we're sort of still working on. It's a better way to find those quickly so that we know, okay, this book's coming out, maybe you'll like that too. So those are sort of the two obstacles there. But yeah, I mean, I think we're inching towards that. And there are definitely going to be other ways for publishers to be able to sort of leverage, the recommendation engine to, obviously not really affect what it produces, but to sort of help them use what it produces to their advantage, hopefully. So.
Okay, glad to hear that. I applaud you for having that open API that developers can tap into as well. I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I wish that more people use the Goodreads Connect option, because I think it makes so much sense on an e-commerce site, and it makes so much sense. Yeah, I mean, I come from the independent bookstore world, and I think a big problem that they have a lot of times is you land on their page, whether you were reading their blog or you were consuming some of their content or something else that they're really good at, and you land on their website, and then it's oh, actually, this is not a great e-commerce experience, and the book page doesn't really have anything on it. Maybe it has a publisher's weekly review. Maybe it doesn't even have that. So, I mean, all of a sudden, if you had, actually, this is a book that four of my friends have shelved, and one of my best friends really loved it and, wrote this review of it, I just think that makes it for a much more compelling product than a sort of empty page with no social content. So I wish that more people took advantage of that option in the API. And a lot of people are using our reviews and our widgets and our ratings and things like that. So I would love to see more people integrate us more fully into their e-commerce sites.
Well, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, I think you've got a terrific platform in Goodreads. And Patrick Brown, I just want to thank you again for being part of today's TOC podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.